Welcome to the Family History Show by Findmypast. Today we've got a very special edition of the Family History Show. We've got a special guest, Saul David, here to talk about the nation's favourite war stories and more. So stay tuned. Hello everyone and welcome to the Family History Show by Findmypast. It is Friday, it's 4 p.m, so we are here to talk all things family history, but today's is a little bit different. As you will have seen in the description, Ellie has been rude enough to take yet another Friday off, so I have had to rope in the big guns this week. And don't tell Ellie, but it's an upgrade on the guest. We've got a very special edition of the Family History Show, as we've got a very special guest to bring in shortly to talk about the nation's favourite war stories and so much more. So as always, let us know in the comments where you are tuning in from, how things are looking weather-wise, what have you got planned this weekend, and all of that good stuff. But without further ado, I will bring in our special guest. Please welcome to the virtual stage, Mr. Saul David.
Hello, good to be here.
Hello, Saul. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well. How are you?
Good stuff. So yeah, I'm very well, thank you. As I say, it's Friday, an hour left of the working week, and then we're free for the weekend. So not too bad, not too bad. But as I mentioned there, you are here to talk about the nation's favourite war stories, as a piece that we did in the lead up to Remembrance as well. But before we get into all of that good stuff, just as a form of introduction, if you could tell the people a little bit about yourself, your background, etc.
Yeah, well, I mean, age 16, I was determined to write history. I remember being asked by a school friend, what did I want to do with my life, career-wise? And I said, well, I'm going to be a historian. And she said, oh, you're going to be an academic? And I said, no, I'm going to write books. And she was a bit nonplussed by that, I have to say. Moving on after my degree, I wrote my first history book when I was 25, later encouraged, actually, by which time I had 3 or 4 books under my belt, to do a PhD. And I've done a bit of teaching over the years, but really most of my career has been writing, quite a lot of TV, great opportunities to make history programs, including one of my favorites, a Time Watch documentary on Zulu, which was, of course, the story of Rorke's Drift and Islamwana happening on the same day, and lots of other bits and pieces connected to history, including now, of course, I do a podcast called Battleground with another military historian called Patrick Bishop, also ex-war correspondent, and we produce a bit of a hybrid podcast in the sense that half of it's history. We do Second World War on Wednesdays, and on Fridays we cover the Ukraine war. So yeah, a lot keeping me busy still.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you say, you're covering all sorts of time periods in your history as well. You're not too focused on one. Like you say, when you ever research Zulu is one of the first things that comes up. As you say, amazing piece on that, right through to World War II. I know we fielded some audience questions in advance, and everyone is looking forward to tapping into your World War II knowledge as well. So I'm sure you'll be a great help there as well. And you mentioned there you do a podcast as well. So how did that come about?
Well, it came about mainly through my good friend James Holland. James does a podcast with Al Murray called We Have Ways, which is a Second World War podcast. And he was the first podcast, believe it or not, to be set up by the now quite famous podcast producers, Goalhanger, which of course one of the main shareholders is Gary Lineker, hence the name. Mm-hmm. Well, we were number 4 on the list, and they said to us, well, you've got to distinguish yourself from We Have Ways. And although Patrick and I had written quite a few books on the Second World War, we decided to do a more generic battlefield or at least war podcast, and we called it Battleground, and really fell into covering the Ukraine war, as I've already mentioned, almost by accident. I mean, we started off doing a special on the Falklands War, absolutely fascinating, interviewing a lot of people involved in that, including 2 SBS operators who'd never spoken on the record before. So we got 1 or 2, wonderful gems in that series. But of course, by the summer of 2022, the Ukraine war was raging, and given that Patrick is an ex-war correspondent, as I think I mentioned, we didn't really feel we could avoid taking a look at it, and we're still doing it 2 years later. And we've sort of promised ourselves we'll continue until it's over. We don't really feel we can leave it now, not least because the news cycle in terms of its concentration on Ukraine goes up and down, whereas we've been pretty consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you say, it's important covering the past, but also how closely, unfortunately, that links to the present as well, and what the world is going through absolutely as well. So you mentioned there, we kind of spoke about that you cover a broad range of military history. We'll put you on the spot a bit. Do you have a favourite area to dive into at all?
Well, I bounced around so much. I mean, I was asked the question, which battle would I like to have been a witness of rather than actually participating in? I mean, I don't know why people sometimes think that military historians are warmongers. We're quite the opposite. We know far too much about what war is and how it affects people. And, we're all pacifists in the sense that we'd love there never to be wars. But of course, you do need strength to avoid wars, which is, I wouldn't for a minute suggest that Britain. I remember my mum saying to me years ago, well, of course, all we need to do is disarm ourselves and we won't ever have to fight a war again. And I'm afraid that's a rather naive position, as we can see with what's going on in Eastern Europe at the moment. But one conflict I'd love to have seen from, literally from a bird's eye view, I think would have been the Battle of Waterloo. Why? Because it took place in a relatively small space, 2 miles by 2 miles. Both commanders were literally controlling their armies in a way, of course, that rarely happens today with senior commanders. And you could see this incredible visual spectacle, also very, very gory, of course, but you could see this incredible visual spectacle unfolding in front of your eyes, and lots of hinge moments during the battle where things could have gone very differently, right up until the final moment when the Prussians arrive on the scene. So if I could have been a present at one, it would have been that. And I wrote about it a few years ago in a book called All the King's Men, which takes the story of the British Army, which shows you how much I'd moved away from the Second World War at times, from the formation of the British Army in the 1660s all the way up to the Battle of Waterloo in 1815.
I like that distinction as well. Like I say, a very important distinction to witness to, not partake in as well. Like I say, I think it is a common misconception that you'd like to be there all suited up. But yeah, witness to, and like you say, especially how deep you've dived into some of these things, being there, aerial footage, seeing everything unfold in front of your eyes would be, really spectacular as well. So absolutely. And then in the lead up to Remembrance, your relationship with our good selves at Findmypast started because we did start looking at some of the nation's favorite war stories. So looking at the films, the TV shows, even the poems, etc., that the nation finds most poignant at this time of year. I know a lot of the comments we've had on social media in relation to this have been how important some of these films are and remembering the stories that maybe go untold. And like yourself as well, keeping the memories alive through the podcasts and the books that you're writing as well. They all go hand in hand in remembering these as well. So as I say, we are here to talk about the nation's favorite war stories. In my intro, I was so keen to get our guest in, I totally forgot to put the question of the week on the screen. I know some people have answered that already, so I'll just pop it in there in case you missed it in the description. What is your favorite war story, whether it is film, TV show, novel, etc.? Whatever your favorite is, let us know in the comments, and we'll come back later in the show to do a look at what you have chosen, see how it stacks up to the nation's list. But on to the nation's list. This is important to mention, just the top 5 films. There was a top 10 films and a top 10 television shows as well. So as I say, we'll see if any of these feature in your lists. But making the top 5, these was a poll done up and down the country. The ones chosen were Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, Dunkirk, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and The Great Escape. As I say, that is just the top 5. I will pop a link in the chat to the full blog post where you can get the full list of films and TV shows as well. And apologies, Daphne, although we have the military expert himself on, we are talking about fiction today, although as we're about to find out, there is fact behind the fiction in a lot of the cases in these films especially. So, but when it comes to the question of the week, we are looking for your favorite film. So no real life battle stories unless it is a film there. But as I say, there is fact behind the fiction for all of these films, as far as I'm aware. And with Findmypast, yourself did some diving into the kind of background behind these stories, things like Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan as well.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, Schindler's List is an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think it was reasonable. It was based, of course, on a novel written in the early 1980s, I think. I mean, I remember reading it. I'm pretty sure it won the Booker Prize. And the novel, or at least the novelist admitted that he had heavily based it on the real events of Oskar Schindler's life. And Oskar Schindler's this wonderful character. I mean, a very ambivalent character in the sense that he joined the Nazi Party. He was a member of the German Abwehr, which in effect means that he's working for German military intelligence. He was born in what was originally Czechoslovakia at that time, and had been when he was actually born, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But he was ethnic German and was obviously a strong supporter of Germany, because working for German intelligence, he was providing information to the German military that would help them if they ever were going to invade Czechoslovakia. Now, he obviously wasn't a terribly good spy, because he's picked up by the Czech authorities, arrested. But very fortunately for him, of course, we then have that deal between Hitler, the French, and also the British in the so-called Munich Agreement at the end of 1938, and he's then released. Well, later on in the war, which is the point of the film, he goes on to set up a factory. He takes possession of a factory in Krakow in occupied Poland. This is now German-occupied Poland, after of course, the start of the Second World War, when the Germans have taken over part of Poland and the Soviets have taken over another bit. And he uses a lot of labor, some of whom, of course, are Jews. And the really interesting bit of the story is that for the first part of the film, you're really thinking, well, you know, he's just taking advantage of the situation, isn't he? But when he really gets tested, I mean, two things happen. First of all, slowly but surely, his Jewish employees are being killed. Basically, he begins to realize that they're in real risk of them all being done away with, particularly in 1944, when they're beginning to dismantle the camps and they're moving back closer into the heartland of the Reich. And it's at this point that he really comes good, because he uses a lot of his money to bribe people in the SS and in the senior German military to, in effect, allow him to keep his Jewish employees. Now, you could say, well, he does it because he wants to keep his factory running. That's true. But right at the end, there's no question he does it because he wants to save lives. And he manages to get about 1,200 of them, hence the title of the film, Schindler's List, all the way back to Czechoslovakia, which, of course, is where he comes from. And most of them survive.
Mm-hmm. I know, and it's one of those stories that you would be forgiven to think it was just entirely fiction, because it is just such crazy, might not be the right word, but from start to finish, the journey that it takes you on with Oskar Schindler, it is almost quite unbelievable that the transformation that you see in the man, but in the country and around him, and in the world around him at the same time as well, and how it kind of reflects that as well. And yeah, even just the way the film is shot and the black and white aspect of it and everything as well is just, it's an emotional one, but as I say, an incredible story nonetheless, and an important one to know that there is fact behind the fiction in this case as well, as we're talking about. There is quite often behind a lot of these films.
I think in general, Luke, I'd have to say that the films that resonate particularly with the public are ones that do have a truthful element. And if you look through the lists there, I mean, we can come on to Saving Private Ryan in a second if you'd like to, but if you look through the list, 4 of those 5 have a strong element of truth. The 5th, the one I was slightly surprised is included in the list, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, of course, set in a concentration camp in the Second World War, but purely based on the imagination of John Boyne, the novelist, and not based on any fact. And in reality, the likelihood of I think he's a son of either the commandant or maybe one of the German guards befriending a Jewish inmate. I mean, highly unlikely. If you want to see a much more accurate depiction of what the relationship was like between the children of German camp guards, then you need to see the film that was recently done about the family that were at Auschwitz. I mean, I can't remember the name of that film. There's a wonderful film that was out this year. And that's much more realistic. And in that, you see that there's very little contact between, of course, the children. They're effectively behind a big wall and they can't really see what's going on, although they can hear it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Zone of Interest is that film. I'd put it on the top of my head, but yeah, like I say, a much more accurate one. And yeah, The Boy in Striped Pajamas was one that sort of took me off guard a little bit in the list as well. Even just from a visual perspective here, it does look quite out of place. When I think war story, it's not one that would come to my head straight away. You do think of, personally, I think of the more sort of action-based ones, your Dunkirks, your 1917s, etc., obviously there's Schindler's List, which breaks that mold. But yeah, like you say, it was a surprising addition for me, I think, as well, especially in the context of what else is on the list.
I think it's about, that was a very successful novel in terms of sales, and it's relatively recently, probably in the last 10 years or so. That obviously makes a bit of a difference. It's still uppermost in people's minds. What I would have liked to have seen, needless to say, is one of the greatest war films of all time, Zulu, the first film that made Michael Caine a star, actually. A lot of people don't realize that, also starring Stanley Baker, and also Waterloo, of course, the classic film of Waterloo, with Rod Steiger, which I think was made in 1970. So those two films were made a long time ago, and I think that's the clue, really, as to why they're probably not on the list.
Yeah, like you say, whenever it comes to a list like this, there is always an element of recency bias and the age of the audience as well, depending on the age of the people who are being asked. They might not know Zulu, for example, but I should have guessed that was the one you were going to say. I thought that was one. It's been mentioned in the comments a few times as well, and I didn't realize that was the one that was a sort of Michael Caine's a star-breaking role. I always associate him with The Italian Job, of course. So I'd always kind of forget that Zulu was sort of where it began on the screen for him.
Yeah, there's a lovely story about Michael Caine. He originally goes up because he was a South London boy, a Cockney boy himself. He originally goes up for the role of Hook. Hook's the kind of ne'er-do-well character in the hospital who comes good in the end and eventually is awarded a VC. In reality, interesting enough, when I was writing my book Zulu, I did a little bit of research into Hook. He's actually born in Gloucestershire, and they really did take a lot of liberties, a lot of poetic license with the character in the film. But nevertheless, in the film, he's written as a Cockney for good reason. And it was only natural that Michael Caine would go up for the part of a Cockney, given that he was a Cockney, but he didn't get it. And they gave him the role of an officer, of course, and then he has to put on quite an upmarket accent to be able to play that role, almost as a consolation prize. And you've seen how many times he's played that sort of character since then. So it was a real fortunate break for him.
Yeah. Even in my head, like you say, you forget that he's a Cockney, because other than The Italian Job, any role I can associate with him now, he is that sort of well-spoken older gentleman, especially these days. So it's hard to think of him in anything else. But like you say, would have been a strong Cockney accent. I suppose The Italian Job is the exception there as well. He's got the strong accent in there too. But as I say, did not forget that. But I should have known that was the one that you were going to pick as well. And as I say, it's getting a lot of love in the comments as well. You'll be glad to hear that it is very popular amongst the viewers as well. So you're not alone there, and a few good shouts that weren't on the list there as well. But as we touched upon in the beginning of the show there, we have been fielding some audience questions for you. I did try and give you a bit of a heads up so you weren't put entirely on the spot here. But as I say, the viewers are keen to tap in to your military expertise and see what help you can give from a family history perspective, but from a wider contextual perspective on their ancestors as well. So I'll field some of these for you just now, and we can see what sort of help you can provide the audience here. So the first one was from Jan, one of our loyal viewers, but she did say she might be late to the session, so apologies if I've taken your question too soon, Jan. It's available on Catch Up. You can catch us on YouTube and Facebook back as well. But as I say, apologies if you're going to miss the answer here. But Jan asks, her grandfather was in the RAF as ground crew and had gone missing, presumed dead, although he then returned home on VJ Day, much to everyone's surprise. She has his records, which has a date of release as the 28th of January 1945, and references to places such as Limavady, Singapore, Malaysia, and India. Does the information she has suggest he was held captive, or are the places listed just where he would have been stationed?
It's fascinating, actually. I mean, I think we can say, I mean, obviously it would help if I had a little bit more information and if I could see the document itself, but I think we could say without question that he was captured. I mean, what you get with a situation like this, when someone goes missing, particularly when the family don't hear from him until VJ Day, which is basically when he's being demobbed, that generally means they've spent a lot of, they've gone missing, they're presumed dead, and they finally turn up in a POW camp. What's slightly mystifying is the date he was released, because January 1945, doesn't, in my mind, coincide with any of the obvious release dates of prisoners from Japanese prisoner of war camps. They generally happen between March, well, more likely between April and August of 1945, of course, when the war ended. Now, April's significant because that's when a lot of prisoners in Burma were released. It's after the capture of Rangoon, and you see a lot of British coming out then. What she's got is January, and it doesn't really make sense. I mean, the Japanese weren't very good at prisoner exchanges, for example, which the Germans did with a few very badly wounded people. There would be exchanges going back and forth. But so it doesn't really make sense in that sense. As far as the names she's got, they were almost certainly all places she's served at. And the first one's quite interesting because it sounds like a name that could be in the Far East, but I had a quick look at it. There was actually an RAF airfield there, and it is in Northern Ireland, quite close to Derry. So that's obviously where he's been stationed. Then he's gone out to India. Then he's gone out to Malaysia. He was probably, I mean, this is a pure guess now, but he was probably captured in Singapore when Singapore fell in early 1942, and they never heard from him for a while, and eventually he reappears. But that's pure speculation on my part. I'd need to see a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on that, do you have any sort of suggestions for someone like Jan, who any sort of key resources when it comes to things like prisoner of war camps? They do come up again in a couple of questions, but is there sort of a couple recommendations or one big one you could give for someone keen to learn more about that side of the war?
Well, I mean, the problem with prisoner of war camps in terms of all the combatants of the Second World War is that they are run by the other side. So, you know, in the case of Japanese prisoner of war camps, you do get quite a lot of first-hand accounts of people who've been in the camps. And obviously they are, you know, the people who've survived the camps. A lot of people didn't survive the camps. But in reality, you're going to struggle to find official records from the Japanese side that will record these camps, not least because a lot of them were spread out and not just on the Japanese mainland themselves. There's some terrible stories, you know, just as a quick sidebar of prisoners of war, British prisoners of war, actually being killed near the drop site of the first atomic bomb in Hiroshima. I found one wonderful account in one of my books, a book called Crucible of Hell, which dealt with the end of the Second World War, in which a British prisoner of war witnessed the dropping of the other atomic bomb at Nagasaki, but didn't, you know, fortunately survive because he was far enough away. The other way to look at it is to get a more generic book on prisoners of war, but it's a little bit hit and miss, I have to say, when it comes to the Far East. So, you know, so I can't be more help there. The other thing to do, of course, if she knows the unit he served in, is there'll be lots of records, unit records at the National Archives. And it might even be worth a trip down to the National Archives to speak to one of the archivists there. Give them as much information as you have, and they might be able to point you in the right direction. And obviously, there's a document that they've got, that the lady has got there, that she could take with her.
Yeah, absolutely. And Karen has popped the link in the chat for you as well there, Jan, about the Japanese registers of Allied prisoners of war and civilian internees held in camps in Singapore, Second World War. She's popped another one about civilian internment there for us as well, from the Library Archive website as well. So have a look at them as well. But yeah, like I say, it's one of those areas it's always tricky to find. I'm not sure if you watched the most recent season of Who Do You Think You Are? We covered that on this session here, and the actress Vicky McClure, one of her, I think it was her grandfather, her great-granduncle, some relative, was held prisoner of war by the Japanese, and she was taken to the mines that he was working in, and they had all sorts of official Japanese documents that a local expert was translating for them, and she was getting all sorts of information, which is another benefit of the lifestyles of the rich and famous when you're on Who Do You Think You Are, and you get the benefit of this sort of help. Whereas you're
that they found Japanese records that record you know, what was going on there. That's terrific if that's the case. But of course, none of this is going to get you anywhere unless you know the actual location of where the individuals were held. So that's really the first point of call, and then you can work your way on from that.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully that was of some help for you, Jan, and I can see you in the comments as well. So I'm glad I didn't jump the gun with your question and ask it before you were able to join us here today. We've got two more expertise questions, and then we've got one that's coming through the chat as well. So Daphne, another one of our loyal viewers here, says her father was in the 47 Commando Do you know anything about their role in the D-Day landings or suggestions as to where she could learn more about this?
Yes, I do. It's a fascinating story about the 47th. It was a Royal Marine Commando, and their first major action was in the D-Day landings. And their role actually was they landed so they land on D-Day on the 6th of June. They land on Gold Beach, and their job is a very, very important job, which is to capture the port of Port-en-Bassin. Now, Port-en-Bassin was not on the beach, obviously. It was next to it. It was between Gold and the neighboring beach was the American beach, which was Omaha. And the reason they wanted to capture Port-en-Bassin is because, of course, they're landing on these beaches. They know the ports are very strongly defended. So they're going to capture it from the land side. They drop the commandos off, 47 Royal Commando. Sadly, during the actual action to drop them at the beaches, 76 of the original 420 are killed when their landing craft boats are sunk by mines and beach obstacles. So terrible tragedy, but nevertheless, even with a reduced number of men, they do manage to capture Port-en-Bassin during the next couple of days. And by the 8th, they're in full possession, by which time the command is now down to a strength of 19 officers and 259 other ranks. And the commander goes on to, see good service for the rest of the war, operations around Ostend, Antwerp, and the Netherlands, and then sadly disbanded in January 1946. But it does tremendous work, as I hope I've already explained, on D-Day. Not that well known, actually, the story. And as a nice little codicil to all of this, 47 Commando was recently reformed, that is just a few years ago, and now takes back its old role as an amphibious raider, replacing what was the first assault group Royal Marines. So it's back in the order of battle of the Royal Marines, which is nice if you've got a family connection to it.
Yeah, a full circle moment, as you say, being so recently done as well. So absolutely good stuff. That was a brilliant answer. I hope I've not seen Daphne in the chat. I hope she has made it here as well. And as I said, we've got one more, and then the last one is not as research, so you can switch the brain off a little bit more on a Friday afternoon. I know this is maybe the last thing you want, being grilled with all these expertise questions last thing in the week. But Kim Billy, who I can see in the chat, has said that her great uncle was in the 12th Royal Lancers and the Reconnaissance Corps. When looking at his questionnaires for ex-prisoners of war, it says he was captured in Thebes, Greece in 1940, and lists the camp he was sent to, but she can't find anything on Thebes. This is really testing my pronunciation. I was so glad you were there to read the name of that port, because pronunciation for me is a recurring theme on these sessions. Could it be Thebes? Also, while she waits for his service records, where could she go to learn more about the camp she was in, such as Corinth, Stalag, and Wolfsburg?
Yeah, well, the Stalag needs a name attached to it. So all the camps would have had either Dulag, Stalag, Offlag as their prefix. So the Starlag's not really helping us there. There were lots of different Starlags. But I had a quick look at Corinth. And by the way, it's a bit of a mystery, actually, her dates and also the units. Now, I'm sure she's right. She'll know what her ancestor served in. But the 12th Lancers go out to North Africa in 1942, and they served thereafter, in fact, late 1941, and they served thereafter in the Middle East, fight at Alamein, and they carry on through the North African campaign with the 8th Army. So it's a bit of a mystery how he ends up in Greece in 1940. I would suggest much more likely he's captured in 1941, and I've got an obvious reason for that. When the first successful campaign by the British was over in the early stage, well, it wasn't quite over, but Churchill thought it was over in the early stages of 1941, the famous Operation Compass, which drove the Italians all the way back past Benghazi and all the way back to Tripoli. Churchill decided to support the Greeks, and so we send a task force into Greece, about 50,000 men, Australians, Brits, and various other Commonwealth troops. And it's during this action that I would suggest her father's probably captured. Now, the 12th Lancers weren't involved in that, but he might have been in some kind of subunit, maybe a reconnaissance battalion or a reconnaissance force as she mentions. And the clue is Corinth, because Gulag Corinth, which was a Wehrmacht established prisoner of war camp, only lasts a very brief amount of time. It only lasts between May 1941 and June 1941, and it's set up to incarcerate a lot of the guys left behind in Greece that were captured by the Germans when the Germans forced us out. They then, shortly after, recapture Crete, and a lot more prisoners are taken there. So it's possible he was captured at Crete, but it would either have been Greece or Crete. He would have been sent to Gulag Corinth. And there are some quite graphic descriptions of what life is like in there. I mean, I can't give you the links now, but if you do an internet research and just put in Gulag, that's D-U-L-A-G, Corinth, you will come up with a number of really fascinating articles, including one in the Muse. That's a sort of semi-academic resource, and there's a lot of detail about it. I mean, I'll just read out a little bit of it. It's fascinating. Gulag Corinth was used to hold British, Australian, New Zealand, and Serbian prisoners of war. On May the 2nd, 1941, there were 6,121 British servicemen there, including 198 officers, and it eventually grew to 11,110, and it was shut not that long after that, and they were all moved somewhere else. But you know, it does sound like he was there for a short period of time, and if she wants to know what conditions were like in the camp, then have a look at some of these articles that have been written about Gulag Corinth. More generally, unit diaries, of course, going back to the National Archives, will be available on the 12th Lancers, and you can see what kind of service they got up to. But if he's a prisoner of war in 1941, I would suggest, I don't think the date 1940 is correct, because I can't think any reason why any British servicemen would have been captured in Greece in 1940. And as I've just explained, the Corinth prisoner of war camp didn't exist then. The Germans hadn't captured the country, so it's almost certainly 1941.
Perfect. And apologies to both yourself and Kim, because she did give us the numbers of the Stalag camp. I just copy-pasted and totally missed them out. So it was 18A and 18D Stalag. It was. So apologies.
But and again, there is a lot of information about all the Stalags. I mean, a good place to go also would be to go into the National Archives and ask them about. There are a lot of information about escaped prisoners of war. There's something set up called MI9, which is anyone coming back from any of these camps, they'd be debriefed, and so there are lots of wonderful reports about how people escape. And of course, in the course of that, they're also communicating with a lot of these camps. So the MI9 documents contain a lot of information from all the different camps. Given by people who are sending information back, with the intention that ultimately that they would hope to escape, but nevertheless they're explaining what life was like. So there may be some information on those camps in the MI9 reports.
Good stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Hope that was helpful for everyone's research. I'm sure it was. It was much more than I could ever imagine of offering with a week worth of Google for myself. So the expertise is very much appreciated for myself, taking the heavy lifting for me, and I'm sure the audience feel the same. I can see some thanks in the chat as well. Jan and other people in the chat are already starting the research of your advice there. So thank you very much. As I said, we will let you go very shortly, but just to wrap up with one from the chat here. As I say, a little bit more lighthearted than the heavy research stuff. Jeff is asking, is there a campaign you have yet to cover? And I'll piggyback off the back of this. Is there one which you are especially looking forward to covering that maybe you haven't had a chance to do so yet?
Well, believe it or not, given the amount I've written about the Second World War, I've never covered D-Day in the round, and therefore the campaigns after that towards the end of the Second World War. And that's exactly what I'm working on at the moment. It's not going to be a book about D-Day, but it will be the story of the end of the Second World War in Europe. So it's pretty ambitious. I mean, if you think of some of the great works that have been written by some of our top historians over the last few years, including Max Hastings, who wrote a wonderful book called Armageddon, which was the battle for Germany, as he called it. My book is even more ambitious. It starts earlier, and it includes, as well as the Western Front, that of course is all the famous actions like Battle of the Bulge and Arnhem, crossing of the Rhine, but also the Eastern Front, which Max also covered. But then I've got the Italian Front too. So it's a hugely ambitious project, but a lot of campaigns I've never written about, particularly the Eastern Front, which I'm looking forward to getting my teeth into.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was agreeing at the start when you said it's hard to believe that you haven't done D-Day yet, but as you say, when there's so much already out there, I can imagine the level of detail that you're looking to go into and the research that involves as well. It becomes perfectly understandable that you haven't done D-Day yet when, as you say, you talk about the sheer scale of the project at hand as well. So we will all be looking forward to that as well, and wish you all the best with the research for that. But I think we will, as I say, let you go and enjoy your weekend. Just before you go, where can the people follow you? Where can they find your books? Keep an eye on what you're up to.
Well, books are available where, all over the place. Yeah, bookshops, online, of course, Amazon. My most recent book out this year, Sky Warriors, on the story of British Airborne in the Second World War. And while I say I haven't covered D-Day in any detail, I do touch on the story of Airborne during D-Day, which of course was an operation called Operation Tonga, including the capture of the famous Pegasus Bridge. As far as following me on social media, at Saul David 66 on Twitter. And also you can follow my Battleground podcast, again, wherever you get your podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. And check out the great short form videos that Saul did for us as well for a further look at Schindler's List, at Saving Private Ryan, and at The Great Escape as well, the true story behind them, available on our social medias and on Saul's as well. But on that note, Saul, thank you very much indeed for your time this week. It's been a pleasure having you on. I'm sure the audience have greatly enjoyed it as well, for the research help that you've given, for the great chat, the great insights as well. So again, thank you from myself, from the audience as well, for your time this evening, and I hope you have a lovely weekend, and it'd be great to have you on another time in the future as well.
Yeah, hope so. Have a great weekend.
Cheers, Saul. Great stuff. So that was military historian, author, broadcaster Saul David. As a great guy to speak to. The knowledge that comes across, that whenever I speak to any expert in any field, it does sort of just blow my mind as to how much they actually know about these things. You see the list of books he's written, the TV shows that he's on, the podcasts that he hosts. But when you're actually sitting speaking to someone like that, as I say, it's aspirational to know that much about anything, let alone something as in-depth and as complicated as the kind of stuff that he is looking at as well. So a massive thanks to Saul for his time. Seen some great discussion in the chat about what Saul has been talking about, and his research help as well. So thank you very much for your questions in advance as well. I hope, I'm just going to say I hope, but I'm positive that Saul's help has been a great help, because, as I say, when you have someone as knowledgeable as that at your tip of your fingers, it's always worth asking the question. So hopefully that will break down some brick walls for you all, and you can report back as well. And as Kim says, it'd be great to see Saul on a future Findmypast live as well. This was quite a last minute one, this one, so it was really great for him to take the time right at the end of the week to come on, speak to myself, speak to you all as well. And as I say, don't tell Ellie that I said it was an upgrade on the co-host. As I say, it's her own fault for booking off yet another Friday when she's meant to be here with me, but it worked out in the end. The show must go on, as the saying goes. But back to just myself. Don't worry, I know we've kind of crashed down a bit from the height of having Saul on. Now you're stuck with just me on the screen. It's not what you want to end the week, but I won't be here for long. We'll do some question of the week, and then I will let you all get on with your weekend. So a reminder of the question of the week, based on what we were speaking about with Saul there. What is your favorite war story, whether it is a film, TV show, novel, a poem, etc., as well, was mentioned in there as well. So let us know in the comments there. To answer your question, Daphne, who is in the comments, I am also in the comments. Now that Saul is gone, I'm a one-man band today. I've been posting links in the comments. I've been keeping an eye on the question of the week answers coming in. I'm furiously scrolling back through to make sure I've caught most of them here as well. So I'm just scrolling through as I dilly-dally and speak there. But yeah, as I say, one-man band today. I've been in the comments. I've been hosting. I can do it all, as they say. I can do it all. I'm joking. But yeah, let's have a look at the question of the week answers, your favorite war stories, and see how it stacks up to the list, which I'm just going to open and remind myself, because there are so many good ones there. Let's have a look. So Zulu was mentioned. Janet's one of her late mother's favorite films. Zulu is a really good one. As Saul said, one of his favorites as well that it tends to be one of his kind of areas of expertise. As he said, one of his earliest works is on Zulu, one of his biggest works is on Zulu War as well. So a popular one for Saul, Janet, and Jeff as well. All three getting votes there. As Saul said, it's not actually on the list. Maybe, as we were saying, it's an older one. So there's the recency bias, and someone my age, for example, Zulu would not be one of the first ones that comes to my head. So will maybe forgive him for being on the list there. But let's have a look. What else have we got? Janet also suggesting a TV series, Foyle's War, links to the home front to major World War II events. And that's a good one as well, linking the home front, because as I mentioned earlier, when I think of war films, war TV shows, I'm thinking big action pieces, 1917, Dunkirk, etc. So it's always there, but linking the home front to the World War II events is an important element of the war to speak about as well. We've been posting a bit about that, a land army in particular as well. But yeah, it's an important one, and good there's a TV series about that as well. Another popular one coming up is Warhorse. I can see a lot of people saying that in the comments, and when we posted about the list on our Facebook page earlier in the week, a lot of people mentioned Warhorse as well. I will admit it's not one that I have actually seen, and maybe for the reason that Jean says here, that she cried her eyes out on Sunday afternoon when she watched it once again. I'm really bad with animals in films. If there is a dog, a cat, a horse, whatever it might be, if any harm comes to the animal, I really struggle. Anything else, Dunkirk, etc., I can move on from. But yeah, animals in films is not my speciality. Let's say that will always get to me. So I'll probably be right there with you, Jean. But Schindler's List comes second on your list. So it's top of the nation's list, second on Jean's. Let's see. Janet, another one from Janet there, another important one as well. Millions like us, the women in factories, as her mother was. So it's especially important when you've got that family connection to it as well. And the earlier Dunkirk film as well. I've seen a lot of people mention that in the comments. I've only seen the most recent one, of course. I went to see that in the cinema. It holds a dear place in my heart. I think it was the first time me and my now girlfriend went to the cinema when we were just starting going out was to see Dunkirk. So it's always one that holds a place in my heart. What else have we got here? Jen will be giving me a route if I don't mention this one, because one time we were on a live, she mentioned Gettysburg, and it wasn't one I'd heard of or seen, but it's been getting a lot of love in the comments on her social posts as well. And I know Jen is a big fan. Ellen, she says Gettysburg, Midway, Dunkirk, Warhorse. Too many. It is one of those categories when there is just too many choice. It's one of them that if someone asked me, I'd probably have a couple snap answers, and then the more I start thinking about it, the rest of the day things are just going to be popping into my head. Even when I've been talking about this and looking at the list of films, the list of TV shows, so many just pop into your head, and you just remember that there's so much out there. But as I say, I would have always a kind of a snap answer or two, and then they just keep on rolling. Rest of the day, keep on coming in as well. So it's a big category. It's a hard one to wrangle down to a top 5, let alone I'm asking you for a top 1. So it's yeah, I put you all on the spot. But as I say, some brilliant answers coming in. I'll just do a quick scroll and see what else have we got. Going a bit more old school here with Kim Billy. First of the few from 1942 about R.J. Mitchell and the Spitfire. That would be an interesting one. I haven't heard of that one. Not even going to read that comment out from Daphne. I will ignore that today, although I'm hoping it is made in jest. No, I'm only joking. I can. It's been a struggle. You probably see me sort of eyes off to the side, hear me furiously type in the background, but as I say, there wasn't too much to be posted in the comments, so I was more than happy to do it myself. And Rosie saying that can't even watch Dumbo or Bambi, no animals, real or animated. And I know what you mean about animated pets and animals as well. In the family group chat the other day, my dad shared the clip from the Charlie Brown TV show where he first gets Snoopy, and it's just probably about a minute-long clip of Charlie Brown adopting a cartoon dog, but it gets me every single time. And I was glad to know that it got my sister and my dad as well, because it is, as they, animated or real, I'm right there with you, Rosie. It's emotional when animals are involved. Don't get me wrong, it's emotional when people are involved, but there's something about animals. Marley and Me, for example, is a film I will never watch because I just know it is going to hit hard, and I don't want that. I want to enjoy films sometimes, and I don't need that in my life. I don't need the pain that is going to put me through and the memories it will bring up. So yeah, nothing to do with animals, although as I say, Warhorse has been a very popular one recently. So I might need to add that to the list, but it'll be far down the list for sure, because as I say, not my type of thing when animals are involved. Good stuff. Well, thank you all very much for your lovely suggestions. My Netflix viewing list is growing by the day. It grew quite a bit when the first list came out, and I've got a lot more suggestions here as well. So thank you all very much for your suggestions in the comments. Thank you all for a great session as well. We couldn't do these things without yourselves here to view, here chatting in the comments, asking people like Saul the questions, and just welcome them into our little community here as well. So I do thank you all very much, and especially for being on your best behavior. As has been told, I can multitask. I have been keeping an eye on things in the comments. So as I say, always appreciate you all being on your best behavior in the comments as well. Great to see people helping each other out with the research as this goes on as well. And yeah, you'll all need to report back anyone that got research help today from Saul. Do let us know next week or whenever we're back on how you got on as well. It'd be great to hear how those brick walls have been broken down with Saul's research as well. So again, thank you all very much for your participation here today. Off the top of my head, I think it is going to be Jen next week, but don't hold me to that. Jen or Rose, it will be next week with the Family History Expert Hour. Sure to be another great session to tune in there for that. But for now, I will leave you all to enjoy the weekend when it comes for you all. Thank you very much again, and I will speak to you all very soon.